So it's really difficult to try to understand what she's talking about. But let's concentrate, go back to the Buddha, and possibly try to give the idea of what Padre Pio was saying. So the Buddha said the idea of moksha, the idea of liberation, the idea of entering into nirvana, or that deathless state. He said the first noble truth is to comprehend suffering. Next, to understand it started somewhere. The third noble truth is because it began, it must come to an end, therefore it is temporal. And then the fourth noble truth is to develop a path toward the end of suffering. And this is what, in the Vedic teaching, as well as in the early Bible, and also in the Torahic teaching, they'll say that liberation from this sorrow is simply a state where we become completely separated from the possibility of experiencing pain and sorrow. So if moksha, or liberation, is the severance of the contact with sorrow, then it shows the fact that sorrow and suffering in the world is literally the means by which it will invoke in us effort to try to rise out of it and transcend it. So Padre Pio, the great Capuchin monk in Pietrelcina in Italy, he lived with, it said, literally the wounds of Jesus. And a very interesting thing happened to him at night. If you read his life and a biography which is written by some of the monks who were with him, he would literally be visited by demons, by incarnated spirits during the night. And they literally would appear in a physical form and beat him all night long. The furniture in his room would be thrown apart, broken. And the other monks in the monastery would hear this. They'd hear this tremendous battle going on in his room. And in the morning, they'd come to Padre Pio, and he would literally be laying virtually unconscious on the floor with literally wounds and bruises from the demons beating him. And this happened night after night after night. And so the brother said, won't you pray to God that this won't happen, that the demons will fly? Because surely he had the power to even let them flee. And he said this. He said, I welcome that, because when those dark spirits come in a physical form and start to beat me, the glorious Mother of God, that the Bhagavati, the divine goddess, she also comes, and she literally sits on the bed and watches. So here you can see, how can you understand that this great saint literally being beaten as the glorious Mother, the Virgin Mother, the Queen of Heaven, is watching? Because he said it was her presence, that he was enduring the suffering, and his endurance of it pleased the Mother, and she basically at one point, she raised her arm in a sense, made a gesture, and the demons flew away, and then he had some time with the glorious Mother, the glorious Virgin alone. This is very similar if we go to the East and we see the life of Sri Krishna, especially portrayed at the time of the Bhagavad Gita. The mother of the five Pandava sons, Arjuna being one of 5 sons, her name was Kunti, and they have the famous prayer of Kunti. And her prayer was literally, O Lord, bring all the suffering upon me, and don't dissipate my suffering. Because when I suffer, and she literally suffered the worst of a mother's suffering, because as the war went on, her 5 sons, one after another, except for Arjuna, were killed in battle. And she had to literally take the body of her son, one from the eldest on the way down, and literally bury them. In this 18-day battle, she buried 4 of her children. So her suffering was tremendous. But as each calamity came, the Lord came. Sri Krishna himself manifested to her to, a sense, assuage her pain and suffering. So her prayer was, give me all the suffering you want. Not because she felt that she could endure it, but because the Lord came to her right after the suffering. So we see a lesson that's just trying to convey to us that this suffering is a way that we will surrender and again call upon God. And God comes and gives us the ability to overcome. So she would say, "Oh Lord, I don't mind the suffering. I wish it wouldn't happen, of course. But the fact that you come at the advent of how I suffer, that advent, that coming of you is enough to alleviate all the pain." So it's a tremendous lesson. It's really hard to kind of get your whole mind around. But this is the truth. And in the East and the West, you'll find all of the saints, all the masters are saying the same thing. That as the Buddha conveyed, the highest virtue is patient perseverance. It's really interesting. And he said the highest virtue being patient perseverance, but the very highest, the highest quality is literally unbinding. So in the Pali Sutra, where the great monks repeat the words of the Buddha, he said this unbinding from being affected by the world is the reason why Hari comes to us, gives us trials, tribulations, joys, all mixed up. So again, let's just, there's a game that we play sometimes in the East when you get bored, when there's nothing to do and the food's terrible and you're sick. We pick up a holy book and we just open it at random somewhere and just see what the saints will tell us. So why don't you just open somewhere and just open it up at random and give it back to me and I'll read it. And we'll see what the Lord has to say. Okay. People often get worked up when they say it really doesn't matter whether it's someone, something, or many thousands of people have to go to their death. It really doesn't matter. It is not as if we want to fall into the arms of destruction with a resigned smile, far from it. Eddie says, I am only bowing to the inevitable. And even as I do, I am sustained by a certain knowledge that ultimately all of this suffering makes God dynamic in my life. Incredible. This dynamic aspect of God, God literally helping us. So this woman who suffered terrifically had this realization that the same thing as Kunti said, the Lord comes to us in the suffering. But of course, the idea is through sadhana, meditation, all of the things that we know to do, the chanting, all that we find which gives alleviation from suffering, if it's done with the aspect of not, oh Lord, relieve all the suffering, but come and be, as Eddie said, a shelter in my life. This is really, in the East, they talk about the word saranagati, or surrender. It's really interesting because Paramahansa Yogananda, who is the Mahavatar Babaji was the grand guru, he said this, that the word surrender meant to take shelter in the consciousness of God, like shelter like a harbor from the sea of turbulation. And so the purpose of the sea of misery, or the sea of samsara, where we have misery and joy, we have fun and loss, we have health and disease, we have wealth and poverty. The purpose of it is to seek shelter in the consciousness of God while we have the joy and the sorrow. So this is just a topic that I hope someone maybe would have a question, so we can just have really an informal kind of conversation about these ideas. Yes. Living